Welcome back to Between the Levees. I'm joined today by Captain Royce Legg, who's been with Moran Towing for a couple of years and has been at this industry for 3 decades, and a little bit over that. So I've been waiting on this for a little while to have this conversation. Captain Royce Legg, thank you for joining me.
No problem. Good morning.
Good morning to you. You've seen this show a few times. You know how it begins, sir. Please tell me, where were you born?
I was born in 1972 in Rota, Spain, NAS Rota, Naval Air Station Rota. And my father was, of course, in the Navy.
What did he do in the Navy?
He was aviation boatswain's mate, which are the guys with the yellow shirts in front of the airplanes and the aircraft carriers.
Okay. How often was he out at sea when you were growing up?
I mean, that's the year I was born was one of his very first years shoreside. Before that, he was probably 18 years in the Navy, almost always gone.
Okay. And what did he do shoreside?
He tried shore patrol for a little while, and he didn't enjoy that at all. And he went kind of in administration, and then he went back to the fleet as an instructor for about 4 more years.
How long were you in Spain?
We lived there till right after my fourth birthday, and we moved back stateside to Southern California till I was about 7, and then we moved to Louisiana.
And that was all following his career?
Yeah. So he's from was Dodge City, Kansas originally, and him and his father evidently didn't have a very good relationship. So he lied about his age. He joined the Navy when he was only like 16 to get out of town. And he met my mother at down in South Texas, the Victoria Air Station. They were doing training with new pilots and deck familiarization and stuff like that. And they met at a USO dance when he was 18. And they were married a year later. So the first, like I said, 18 years, I guess, he was mostly fleet side and deployed, a lot of time in Vietnam. Before I was born, I've got a brother that's 11 years older than me and a sister that's 10 years older. And the gap between my sister's birthday and my birthday is almost exclusively spent in the South Pacific during Vietnam.
Where are your siblings today?
We live real close together. My sister lives just like 3 blocks from me in Gramercy still, and my brother lives in Prairieville. I'm sorry, he lives in Prairieville.
Okay.
So
what do they do? Did they go into the maritime industry or anything?
my brother actually is the one who got me on the boat in 1991. He was here at the former company as an onboard engineer, and they were short of deckhands. And the sort of a backstory, I signed up to join the Navy in high school in what they call the delayed entry program. And by the time I got there, the Navy and I figured out we weren't going to be a good fit, so I was gonna come home. And I shipped home on April 9th, 1991, and he picked me up at the airport about 8 o'clock that night, and he took me straight to a tugboat 8 o'clock the next morning.
Well, if I may, is there a story there? What happened with the Navy?
No, really just typical Gen X teen angst. Just wasn't going to work out.
Gotcha. What about your sister? What does she do?
My sister is now a business advisor. She works for a contractor for the state school board system. And I'm not exactly what she does in detail, but it's a consulting firm that they have contracted with the Board of Education, state of Louisiana. She's a part-time teacher sometimes. She fills in with that, and she I'm not exactly sure what she consults.
That's no problem. Are your parents still alive?
No.
All right. Well, when did your father retire?
He retired in 1976, late 76. And while he was in the Navy, he did what they call I think it's called college at sea or something like that. He did college credit hours while he was on board the ships. And by the time he had finished like almost 22 years in the Navy, he had a degree in mechanical engineering, hydraulics, and steam process. and he went straight to work for Exxon almost immediately, right up as soon as he retired. And so we live near Long Beach, the former, I guess it's still there, the big Exxon refinery in Long Beach. And in late '78, Exxon bought in as I guess a silent partner of the old Good Hope refinery in Norco years and years ago. And they were going to do the management and staffing. They asked for volunteers to move to Louisiana to be plant managers and shift managers and stuff like that. So he came over as the engineering manager for the rebuild. And that was, I think, November '78, he came over. Familiarization with the company, finding a house and all that stuff. And we moved at the end of the school year. So like May of '79, we all drove over from San Diego to Convent, Louisiana, is where we ended up living.
Bit of a change there. How was that that transition?
You know, it's interesting. It was great because for what we had thought was going to be the first time we were going to be settled without having to move again and stuff like that for a long time. And the reason he decided to take the job is because, like I said, his family's from Dodge City, Kansas originally. My mother's family is from Victoria, Corpus Christi. And it would have been the first time in over 20 years that they were both within less than a day's drive of home. So like, yeah, we'll do that. We'll be closer to home. We have time for, you know, holidays and stuff like that. And very unfortunately, he passed away in November that year, 1979, with a, I guess you call it a hunting accident, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry to hear that. How old were you?
I was 7.
Man, sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Did your mother work prior to his death and after?
No, afterwards, yes, but before, no, she never had a job until he passed away.
What did she do after he passed?
Oh man, at first it was just sort of whatever she can do to make ends meet, and through an arduous life and career, she ended up as a senior purchasing agent for Trans-American Refining at the same refinery, actually, Good Hope, years and years later. And she ended up retiring. It became Valero Refining by the time she retired, but she was a senior buyer for the refinery.
Okay, well, good for her.
Yeah.
Do you have any interesting memories of Spain or California?
Spain, I don't. The family's got tons of stories, but I don't remember any of it actually. The craziest thing, I guess, would be like when we first moved back stateside, I had to go take remedial English to get into kindergarten because I spoke more fluent Spanish than I did English, because we had a housekeeper, as a husband and wife, a housekeeper and a gardener. And everywhere they went, they would just throw me in like a little backpack papoose thing, and she would like read like nursery tales to me and sing lullabies to me, everything in Spanish. So I just started corresponding with her and her husband. And my mother spoke Spanish because she grew up in South Texas. And so yeah, I had to learn remedial English to get into kindergarten. So I don't remember that either, but like, yeah, that's like one of the stories my parents used to like to tell.
Sure. What about California, which with 3 years, I think you said?
California was fun from what I remember. Most of the time in California, when he was alive and I was with him, just a couple of years with him before he passed away. Since he was in the Navy, we had all the like we spent almost every weekend in Disneyland, because it was like family passes for the Navy were like $4 and stuff like that. So it was pretty much like our daycare was Disneyland. Yeah, they would just drop us off and come back and get us in the afternoon. We just run rampant in Disneyland. That was kind of neat. Man, what else was happening? We got to see, I think it was 1977 or 78. The San Diego Padres and the Oakland A's had a pennant race. That was kind of neat. We got to see that. It was like a 3-game homestand for the Padres back in the day with Catfish Hunter and all those guys. And that was kind of cool.
Tell me about growing up in Convent, I guess through the 80s.
So Convent, it was really unique for us to settle in, especially from the West Coast sort of an independent family, right? A military family moves around a lot to a place where it's notoriously family oriented. Like the names of the streets on River Road are Sheck Snyder and Bourgeois and Becknell and Hotard, and like the grandfather owns the first house and the oldest son owns the next house. And like that was so alien to us that the entire families will live and connect that closely. That was sort of a system shock. It took us a little while to get used to. And it was fun though. Right? Like I missed the house in Convent. I missed living there. It was so much room, so much. It was just wide open. And growing up in the '80s versus growing up now is like totally different. Like, you know, the whole latchkey kid thing. You know, parents work and you just whatever run rampant as long as you're inside before like 8 o'clock at night and you get your homework done. So that was always great. Like the whole thing was great. The friends we made. One of the friends I made when I was in elementary school, we still talk. And he grew up just probably half a mile up the road from where I lived. And we didn't know each other when we were very, very young, but we met each other later on and didn't realize, like we knew we saw each other before, but we didn't realize like how close we lived to each other until we really started hanging out. But Convent's a very cool place, man. It's such an old historic place for like South Louisiana. There's so much stuff to it. The plantations. There's this huge Catholic retreat called Manresa right on College Point. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. It's gorgeous. They've got a walkway out to the levee and to the battery, which is lined with trees, and there's like benches for meditation out on the riverbank, and all that kind of stuff is really neat. We didn't have any like rules when we were that young and back then. So go-karts and dirt bikes and fist fights, and like we didn't even, if you caught us with like more than a pair of shorts on, you were lucky to see us. You know what I mean? Like barefoot, no shirt all day long, every day until we had to get on a school bus. And then yeah, it was great. Convent's great. I like all the stuff we ended up finding in Louisiana compared to where we had been before. And I don't have a very tight recollection of what we had before, but I don't know. I couldn't imagine growing up anywhere else. Yeah.
Sure. Well, tell me about school and I guess extracurriculars aside from hanging out with friends.
No, I didn't have anything really extracurricular. School was just like completely average. I tested really early in the gifted and talented program, and the resources to follow up on that from the school side were sort of limited. Like back in the day, it was like accelerated reader or science fair, stuff like that. And it felt like a lot of wasted time. And I lost interest in school like pretty early on. And, you know, one of the things like going back to growing up in Convent and then ties into school too, when my father passed away, my brother was 18 and my sister was 17. We drove to Dodge City, Kansas for his funeral, and we came back, I guess it was like the second week of December in '79. And my brother went straight to the school board. He quit school, went to the school board office, took his GED and passed it the same day. And like 2 days later, he was outbound to San Diego for the Navy. He just left. Like it was a lot for all of us to deal with. And that's how that was his first step in his process. And then my sister, at the end of the school year, she transferred to a school in a junior college near Corpus Christi. So we went from like this typical American nuclear family of 2 parents and 2.7 kids to just me and my mother in a matter of months. And it was looking back at it now, like it explains so much about me that I didn't realize was going on because I was so young. With my mother having to work more than one job, pretty much free reign to come and go when I wanted to, without any kind of like rigid format to keep me in line, like I lost interest in school so fast. And to it was bad. Like it was pretty bad. Like there was a lot of times I understood what the curriculum was better than the teachers were trying to teach us. And all of it just added up to me just totally losing interest in school.
Was college ever in the cards for you?
No, I didn't think it was. I had no aspirations for college. That's why I was going to join the Navy, because that was sort of family history, right? My father, his youngest brother, there was some uncles that I've like way out on the periphery of my existence that I know their family, but I've only met them like once when I was really, really young. The Navy was always kind of in my dad's side of the family. So I thought that was going to be the thing, like to fall in line with the family tradition. And I just had too much rebel, I guess. It just wasn't going to work. But yeah, so instead of college, I thought I was going to be a military kid. I mean, like enlisted for a while, and it didn't work.
So yeah, you couldn't come to terms with the Navy, and you went straight to work. You said your brother got you out there. So let's talk about your brother. You said he went straight to the Navy after your father passed.
Yeah.
And walk me through as you can of his career into towboats and forward.
So he went Navy. I guess technically it was 1980. He was out by 86. He did 6 years. He was a sonar technician on an anti-submarine ASW fleet out of Jacksonville. He was the sonar operator in a P-3 Orion and a couple of different helicopters on the ships. And when he got out, he kind of made his way around here and there, odd jobs, and worked at a refinery as a security guard, did some club bouncing at nightclubs and stuff like that. And then I'm not even sure exactly who talked him into coming to the tugboats. But that's where he was. And he started out as a deckhand. So the company I work at now, right, Moran, back in 07, they kind of bought up a few smaller operators on the East Coast, and then they found the company that I worked at as formerly River Parishes Company Incorporated, Rivco. So he was working for Rivco and that family, and he made his way obviously from deck to engineering. And then when I got hired on, just within I say a few short years, he was shoreside as a port engineer. And he worked port engineer with the company until 2008. And then there was a reduction in workforce and a restructuring and stuff like that. And this spreadsheet said there was too much shoreside support for a fleet of only 6 boats. So his number was the one that was drawn. And he ended up going to work for, give me a second, J&J Marine down in Laplace. And that was a contract to a company for a CGB fleeting. And now he works for Cooper Consolidated as a support engineer, portside engineer. I mean, shoreside engineer.
Assigned to a certain fleet, or what was he doing now?
I'm not sure how they're structured, but he's in Destrehan at their office down in Destrehan, or their Riverside office down there. So yeah, that's where he's at. He does a lot of the purchasing and logistics for him now.
Okay.
He does very little wrench turning now.
Yeah. Well, back to you. So April 91,
Yeah.
you come knocking on the door to get on a boat. Tell me about onboarding. Tell me about the first time you step out there.
Man, it was said April 10th, 91, met at the office for crew change. They introduced me to a few people and told me who I was going to be working with. First captain I worked with, his last name is Fauché. And we went out and we got on board the boat. We were at they used to call it T-Bone, Shell T-Bone up in Geismar. And we had to cross the dock and climb down the dock face to get to the tug. Like it was so wild back then. And literally got off the airplane the night before, and all I had with me was this the Navy calls it a ditty bag. It's like a little small duffel bag, and it had what was my 2 sets of civilian clothes, the one I flew out in, the one that let me buy on the way home, and all my PT gear, and then a shaving kit, like it's, little sundries and such. So he's like, perfect, you don't even have to unpack your bag. We'll just everything you have is exactly what you need. So went out there, and it was awesome, man. It was so cool to see something that I'd never even considered before. To go from I have no idea what is going to happen tomorrow to like having that the next morning was excellent. It was so beneficial, obviously 32 years later, but it was pretty wild. And when I did get home after work the next week, none of my friends knew I was coming home. They all thought I was still in San Diego. So to come out of that with the only guy in the group with a job now, it was pretty neat. So supported some pretty poor habits for all my friends for a couple of years in decade's pay. That was the only one with a job.
Yeah.
Onboarding didn't really happen. It was just like, man, this is where you're going to sleep. This is how you start the engine. You're up at midnight. You don't go to bed till noon, and you just do what you're told, pretty much what we ask you to do. And it was great. It was a good way to learn, man. It's such a different way. Now there's a lot of written orientations and vessel orientations and pre-boarding safety training and all these other kind of things. And it's all necessary. It's all great stuff. But compared to what it was in 91, it was pretty neat. It was a great experience.
What kind of hitch were you working and where were y'all running?
So we ran the boat I was on. We worked from Burnside to Baton Rouge, was generally sort of our area dispatch, and we worked 7 days on and 7 off on a Wednesday crew change. And ended up working with Captain Fauché for about 4 months. And then they asked me, maybe not even 4, and then they asked me to work over on another boat instead of going home one time. And so I ended up working on a boat. That first boat was called the Iberville. The second boat was called the Baton Rouge. And they were both, oh man, I don't know, 85 by 20 single screw tugs, like really cool boats, old boats that they were great boats. But anyway, the second boat I ended up working on, I stayed on that boat for about 8 weeks total. And I worked with both captains, and both of them went to the office and asked if I could get stationed on their tug with them. I didn't know that. And so there was kind of a back and forth about which captain I was gonna get the new guy. And I ended up with a fellow named Posey, Wayne Posey. And he was, it's funny how things work out. He was probably the exact person I needed right then for everything, not just the career wise. Like without a father figure, going for 14 years without a father figure, or 12 years without one, to have him as a captain, a boss, and a mentor was probably the greatest thing that's happened in my career, was working with Captain Posey.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
He was a super straightforward, no nonsense kind of guy. He's from he grew up originally in the north side of Baton Rouge near Plank Road and all that kind of stuff. And his family was always into horses and cattle ranching and stuff like that up when that was still sort of a thing around North Baton Rouge. And he just kind of had that cowboy attitude, even when it came to tugboats. He never told a pilot no. Like, no matter what they asked him to do with the tug, he was going to do it. And our bosses used to complain that he was such a throttle jockey on the tugs. He was tough on the tugs, but he got it done, man. It was impressive. I had no idea what it was when I was a deckhand, but when I started learning how to run a boat, I'm like, holy shit, that's what oh my God, man. And he made it look so effortless. Like, that was the greatest thing. But his attitude and his personality, like I said, it was probably the most perfect and beneficial thing right when I needed it the most. And like his 2 favorite things to tell us, the 2 things I remember the most that he told us, like, we had this one job. It was pretty rough. The weather was not cooperating. It was, probably after midnight, pitch black. And it was getting him, man. He pretty much had his ass handed to him. And I'd never seen that before. And after we were tied off and we kind of settled down, and it's like, damn, Cap, like that was pretty wild. He goes, look, man, if you're not learning something new every week, you're really not doing your job out here. Like he had no, it wasn't embarrassing or anything to him that he just learned something in his 32nd year of doing it. And he was always pretty humble about that. Like, to be a good teacher, you have to be a good student, no matter how far you are in your progress. And that was something I to this day is like weekly when I start training people. It's like, nobody's perfect. You're not going to get in the first shot. It's like, give it time. You're going to see me mess up in a couple of weeks. Just, he catches all of us, but that's how we learn. That's how we like hone the tools, right? And then the second thing he said, I don't even remember what started the conversation, but he looked at me one day and he's like, you know what? You don't have to be a dumbass every day. Like, what? It's like, just get your head out of your ass and do what I'm asking you to do. I've done all this before you were even born. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like just stop being dumb for a minute. You know, and like, God damn it. I was mad, but an hour later, I'm like, damn, that's some good stuff. That's the best stuff ever. So yeah, that's my new bumper sticker for life is, you don't have to be a dumbass today.
Yeah.
Like, it's obviously a choice, you know?
More people need to hear that these days, I think. But
Yeah.
anyway, all right. So you said the Iberville and the Baton Rouge were single screws.
Yes.
What kind of horsepower?
On the radio, 1800. In actuality, about 1400, 1300 horsepower.
Okay.
EMD 567, 16 cylinders. Oh, Lufkin, like 3-to-1 gearboxes and stuff like that. Yeah. So I mean, that was typical though back in the day. Everybody kind of touted their horsepower, even though it wasn't really there.
Yeah. Well, what kind of tow were y'all moving?
We move ships. We just do ship docking the entire time. It's just ship docking.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
almost the entirety of my career has been ship docking.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have really any experience or reference on that. Tell me about I guess landing your first ship.
Well, the attempted one was just completely horrible, and Wayne had to just push me out of the way and take over the boat. And it was actually, looking back, it's one of the easiest jobs we could have tried to do first. And I was just like really wound up and like I don't know where my focus was at. It just wasn't on like, well, my hand and my head they're just total miscommunication. I was way overthinking it for no reason and all this other stuff. He's like, oh man, he just grabbed me by the shoulder and just pushed me out of the way. And he got the job done, and we sat down, we talked for about an hour. And that might have been the day he told me I didn't have to be a dumbass, actually. But the first one, I don't even remember if I don't think I can actually remember the first one I actually got done properly, like without him having to help. You know, when back in the day, there was no 12-hour rule for captains and mates, and there was no, we didn't even have mates. It was a captain, an engineer, and a deckhand. So if the boat got dispatched, we just kept running. So one of the things we all did was learn how to at least steer the boat, so the captain can take a break, go get some food, take a shower or something. So we all learned that really, really, really early on. And you know, it was sort of a would cut the points, you know, upriver, coming downriver, you take the bend, stuff like that, and you know, slow down for the work boats and you know, make as much time as you can, best speed you can otherwise. And if anybody calls you, don't say anything, because I didn't know what passing arrangements were, you know, so I don't want to say the wrong thing and get everybody in trouble. So he's like, just stay on the same line you're on now and don't say anything on the radio. And he'd come back up like 30 minutes later. And so we all learned how to handle the boat. And the first thing they used to teach us was like actually stopping the tug and tying it off. Because that's actually, it's harder to stop a boat, especially a single screw that's built like that, like a model bow conventional, where that's not squared off to move barges. A single screw like that is that's a whole nother skill to lay one into a dock or something like that, and to be able to bump the throttle just enough without outrunning your position or putting your deckhand's hands in jeopardy because he's trying to get the line out. So that's what they try to teach us first, was actually tying the boat off. And when you see the finesse it takes to do that safely, then like catching a ship at 8 knots is not that bad. It's It can be, but it's not. Like most times, it's not. I think my first job was probably up at Capline St. James, because that's where we were staying for a long time. We used to have like a job with like 3 tugs. The first tug would go in the bow, the second tug would be midship, and the third tug would be under the quarter somewhere. And the third tug would just get hammered because the other 2 tugs would make their run. So they got their wake pushing, and then all the wheel wash from the other 2 tugs coming down. And so that was always kind of a learning curve. The 3 tug jobs was probably the worst thing we had to deal with when we were learning. And then, you know, a lot of stuff with boats, you're kind of controlling inertia, like the mass in motion underway and all that kind of stuff. And one of the tricks is to not fight. You let it run its course for a couple of seconds at a time. So if you get into somebody else's wheel wash and it wants to say push it towards the ship, if you throw like opposite rudder, by the time you break through and the wheel wash hits something else on the boat, like another part of the boat underwater, and you put the opposing rudder, it's just going to stand up and turn instantly like 180 degrees away. And it's super counterintuitive to not want to, like, if it feels like the boat's going to slam into something, just like ride it out. That's one of the hardest things to teach, is like the understanding of relative motion and drift. Let the boat drift in, or let its weight carry it past that and stuff like that. And a lot of guys tend to fight the machine when they first start learning, and it always ends up poorly. Almost always ends up poorly.
Well, what is the process of catching a ship? Are they dropping lines to you? You sending lines to them? And I mean, are you tying them off to anchor buoys and stuff like that?
So when I started, the boats, a 4,000 horsepower boat was a huge boat when I started out. Most of them were about 1,800 horsepower. Maybe you might get lucky and get 2,000, 2,200. So it's a single screw. So you don't really have the ability to twist engines or pin in. You have to make it all happen with wheel and rudder. And then we would lash up to the ships, but they would drop, some of them would drop a messenger to us, but most of the time we had to throw a heaving line from the deck of the boat up to the rail of the ship, which is a weighted like a monkey's fist on a real thin, long heaving line. And the year I started, we were still using like 1.25 inch, 1.5 inch steel cables to send up to the ships. And then we would take these things, and you end up lacing it from the fair lead to the quarter bit, across the bow H bit to the other quarter bit. You just kind of run these really intricate sort of patterns to take up as much slack on the line as you can. And then that's once it's made up, you're kind of in it till the job's done. To get the boat there, the process of getting the boat in there, the first thing is always matching the speed of the ship. And they used to teach us, like, we'd look out a wheelhouse window and we'd see where the fittings on the ship's deck were, the chocks and stuff. And you draw a line straight down, and you find something in the hull, a blister of rust or a spot in the paint, or if you're lucky, it'll be like a plimsoll mark or a tug mark or something like that. And you use that for your reference and not up. Because if you're looking up, you have a tendency to veer into stuff. So we always give them a target eye level. And we try to give them a window frame, keep it inside this frame, and just close your distance, let it close itself. And again, that's one of those things that if they get uncomfortable for a split second and start fighting, it just takes forever to get back in and start over. And keeping the guys confident is key to teaching that stuff. But yeah, so matching your speed, picking a target, and once the boat lays in there, depending on where the ship is going, because sometimes you'll have to make up when the ship is turning. So the bow tug, the ship will be approaching the tug, like the rate of closure is really fast on the bow, but on the stern, you're still driving at it. You can't get the boat to catch it because the ship's turning away from you. So there's stuff like that. Nowadays, with the new tugboats and the new winches and stuff like that, they usually have a heavier messenger line that they drop to us. They don't want us throwing heaving lines up above. Because now we use these tractor tug Z drives. And if you miss the throw and it goes over the side, like between the boat and the ship, if the heaving line throw goes in there, there's 50-50 shot is going to get stuck in one of our own nozzles. We'll pull it, like just render it right off the deck. And so they don't ask us to throw heaving lines anymore.
Right. Well, okay. So I see on your LinkedIn profile, I mean, mate, boat operator, captain, dispatcher, ops manager. Let's walk through your career from I guess your ascent from deckhand up to the wheelhouse, and then did you spend some time shoreside?
I did. About 2 years in, I was engineering. They asked me to move up to engineer, so I took a spot in the engine room, and I had a pretty good mistake, an error. We did basic filter maintenance one night on an EMD, and things have a mechanical fuel pump, and it is you take these secondary filters, they're just like big giant oil spin-on oil filter looking things. So we take these off, and if you take them off, there's a shut-off valve. You close this valve so the fuel doesn't run out while you've got your fuel filters off. So I swapped the filters out and I put new ones on. I forgot to open that return line valve, and I ended up overpressuring the fuel system, and it split a housing on a fuel filter while we were doing the job. So we just pumped fuel off the front of the motor into the bilge. The port engineer we had at the time, as soon as I found out what was happening, the deckhand woke me up at like 3 a.m, 4 a.m. And as soon as he opened the door, I'm like, oh my God, I left the valve closed. Like I knew exactly what it was, just the way he opened the door. Like I knew exactly what it was. I'm like, oh man. So I got down there, and they were still working the boat. So it's not like we can shut the engine down and fix it. So we ended up pumping this fuel out into the bilge, and then called the port engineer as soon as I could, like 4:35 in the morning. He's like, don't worry about it. I'll get out there on crew change. I'll come out with the guys, because it was Tuesday night, of course. So he comes out, and I'm still covered in diesel, trying to help him clean up. He's like, oh no, man, go take a quick shower. Get out of here. I got this. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And by the time I left the boat, got in the carry-on back to the office, he had called the boss and told him I'd lost like thousands and thousands of gallons of fuel and like all this other stuff. So they literally had my pink slip right next to my paycheck when I walked in the door. So that was in, I think, December of '93, and no, November. And then like about 3 weeks later, I got on with a launch service in Burnside, Crescent Ship Service, and worked first on deck. Then I went and got my first license there. So I got 100-ton masters to run the crew boats out of Burnside Anchorage first, and ran with those guys till about 94 to 97. And in February '97, I really missed being on the tugboats, and I didn't think coming back over to River Parishes was an option, just the way everything ended. So I called around the other companies, and EMBSO was hiring. So I went to work for EMBSO for a year, and moved up from deckhand to mate over there. And a lot of good experience there. The guy I worked with over there, colloquially known as a saltwater coon-ass. His last name was Brunet, and we ran an old twin screw boat, and man, he had done so much. He worked offshore before he came to EMB, so anything to do with towing, he was super comfortable and familiar with. And when the pilot would say, hey man, we're gonna do this and this, it's like, oh bro, it'd just be easy if I put you on the hawser. So we were sending lines off the stern constantly with this guy. But I learned more about actual ship movement with him, as much as Captain Posey had taught me about handling the boat and not being a dumbass. Captain Brunet had taught me, like, this is what a boat can really do when you hone the tool and get to the finite part. So we would do a lot of hawser work and a lot of 3-line work. So we had 2 lines spread off the bow and 1 off the stern. And that's probably the closest thing to like moving barges, I guess, in the makeup sort of that we might be familiar with. And that was really cool, because with a twin screw, you can put the boat in a hard press. So if we're made up on the port quarter of a ship on 3 lines, we can put a hard press to port, and we can walk the entire ship. It's slow, but one boat's doing all of it. We can get it out there. And so familiarity with hawser work and actually utilizing a winch. I learned a lot from him in a year. And one of the other captains at the other company, River Parishes, decided to retire. And the family that owned the business, they found out from my brother that I was working for EMB, so they called and asked if I wanted to come back as a captain. So I came back to River Parishes in '97. Full-time captain. First boat was called the Ascension. Beautiful tug, built in like 1918. It was an awesome tug. She was a great boat. Very quiet, very comfortable. We ran that from '97 to January of 2000. And in 2000, we ended up with a super complicated trade law thing between the tugboat companies, and there was some legal stuff run up against between the companies, and River Parishes was on the losing end of that. So to stay viable, they had to like shut down boats. And since I was one of the newest ones brought in, I was one of the first ones let go. And coincidentally, at the exact same time, right here in Lutcher, right next to the Moran office, the Rivco office, Port Ship Service, which is another crew boat operator from New Orleans, they had just opened a new outfit in Grandview, Anchorage, which is the exact same spot where I live now. So they were looking for people to help their operators get familiar with the area. So on my days off, I was working with these guys, and I just ride along on the pilot boat, explaining where things were between Kenner and Burnside, and helping them, you know, pinpoint like ETAs and stuff like that, how long it's gonna take to get deliveries up and stuff like that. So as soon as I got the word I was getting laid off again, I just went straight there and asked if I can come on as an operator for them. And so I ran boats with them for about a year and a half, and to help them like get it was all brand new for them, this area geographically. And then the launch stations, I don't know if you've been around them, they'll take like stores, ship stores, like all the supplies, food, welding supplies, plate steel, all that stuff. So we had a crane and a delivery boat, and we had to kind of like refine the technique of unloading the trucks on the side of the levee and bringing it down to the barge and all that. So it was it was good. It's always fun being on the come up of something new, and to help refine the process. And so we did all that, and about 18 months into it, one of the bosses from Port Ship Service, he was driving all the way up from Chalmette. He decided he wanted to go back to the office. So I kind of convinced him I needed to be the day guy. I needed to be the site manager for Port Ship Grandview. So I got to do that for about 2.5 years. And in '04, the restructuring for River Parishes worked out, and they asked me to come back again. So I went back the third time, I guess, and ended up in 2004 on a twin screw tug called the St. James, and I ran that until 2010, and then that's when the first Z drive was delivered. And the first one came in the end of '09, and I'd asked to go train, and the bosses had told me they had already chosen the guys they want on the tractor. We got our guys. It's not for you. Don't worry about it. It's not something you'll like. It's not for you. Don't worry about it. You know. All right. So, of course, you know, the coconut telegraph runs what it does. So we hear about all these other guys they got asked to go learn and train and stuff like that. I'm like, man, yeah, it's that dude. And he's like, he's always late to work. He's never working overtime. Like, how is he getting this chance and I still don't have it? It's like, because he's not a captain yet. You've already got a full ride. Like, you're not getting off the boat. Like, we need you to run the boat as a captain. So they were still kind of hesitant. And then in 2010 or 11, we needed a second one, and Moran ended up. So in 2007, I'll get to that too, I guess. 2007, Moran Towing of New Canaan, Connecticut, bought River Parishes Company Incorporated. So it went from Rivco to Moran, New Orleans in late '07. So we were all in the Moran system when the new boat started showing up. And there's such a demand for a second boat. There were two boats built and delivered out of Alabama. First was the Captain Jimmy T, and the second was the Shiny V Moran. And they had gone through all the people they thought they were going to have for the Z drive operators. And the kind of like, I don't want to say last minute, but sort of last minute, they asked if I wanted to train again. And when the second boat was delivered, I was the first captain on it, second captain on it technically. So I got to run the tractor tugs. She ended up shifting ports. She went to Port Arthur about a year later, and they ended up chartering a tugboat from another company called the Gasparilla, which is a fantastic boat to play with too. So I ended up on the Gasparilla for about a year, maybe 8 months before she had went off charter. And ran a conventional boat, a twin screw called the Greg Turacamo from 2011 to 14, 15, about 3.5 years, 4 years on that boat. Until the second tractor tug came back, until the Shiny V came back to us. And then did a lot of good work. We used to do a lot of work at Marathon Garyville when the second boat first showed up. When the first boat got here, and Jimmy got here, we were doing a ton of work at Garyville. And we ended up with a contract for the container ships downtown New Orleans in Napoleon and Nashville Avenue. So they had to shift the tractor tug downriver to do the container ships. And that's when they made the effort to get the second one back. And we used to do a lot of running on the boat. They tried to split them up so they weren't always stuck on the same job every day, the same two boats. So they're trying to utilize the asset for the other group of pilots upriver and stuff like that. And we done a lot of running, but it was really good. We covered so much territory every week. We ran miles and miles every week just to keep up with the work. And in 2016, spring of 2016, Moran was going to realign some assets for the Port of Miami. They went through a port improvement project. They deepened the ship channel and all this other cool stuff they had done. So the pilots were really eager to start bringing in bigger ships, but they put a press on the tugboat companies that they needed bigger and better tugboats. And Moran decided to send two of the most beautiful tugboats I've ever been on down there, and they were looking for operators specifically not to mess up what was happening. So they went through a list of operators and their skill sets, and I got a phone call from up north. They asked, like, look, man, we're going over this list of people, and your name's always like third on the list every time. And we know it's a big ask, but would you be willing to help us out and go to Miami and run one of these boats for us so we can, do it all properly and safely? So I did that for 3 years, which was awesome. The Miami pilots are a great group of pilots. By the time, it was a pretty small group of pilots. And we would have meetings with them about every 2 months, which to me was brand new and totally unique. It's over here on the Mississippi River. It's, I won't say unheard of, but it's probably unheard of for 3 tugboat captains and like 8 pilots to sit down and talk about what works and what doesn't work, and how can we do this, either more efficiently or safer. And it was excellent conversations with the pilots. And one of the pilots, we had done a job. The expansion of the Panama Canal had a lot to do with everything that Miami was working on, like as a port. And one of the first ships to come through the new locks, 1,200 feet, like 1189 by like 165, like this giant ship. Is the Japanese container ship carrier company. So they came through and they were the first one to come in, and they came in at like 12 meters of draft, and it's the first time to make sure it all fit, and this ultra large container carrier and all this stuff, and is like a dockside, almost like a parade, man. They had like streamers and balloons, and the captain got off and he signed like a memorandum of understanding between the ship company and the Port of Miami, and the pilots were all there and like, man, you guys need to come up, you need to come up here. So we tied the boats off and they let us go. They let the trash in the gate, so to speak. So we got to hang out with some pilots and some local politicians and the ship captain, and we were talking to one of the pilots, and this is what kind of what instigated the pilot meetings. We were talking to the pilots, and he was a senior pilot at the time. And he was introducing us to some of the other folks and other pilots and stuff. And he turned around and was like, man, this is amazing that Moran went through all the effort to send these boats and you guys here to help us do this the right way. Now we just need to learn how to use these tugs. Like that was like, that was, and when he said it, it wasn't like, he wasn't selling himself short. There was just a very candid admission of like, man, we've never seen things like this. So we asked if you want to talk about it, and they started sending their junior pilots out to ride with us while we're doing jobs, and then they asked us to go ride with senior pilots on the ships coming in to watch with how they utilize the tugs, and it was a really awesome chain of communication, and it kept a lot of what they call, I guess, near misses. It kept near misses super low because we had developed. On a ship, when a pilot gets on a ship, they'll talk to the ship's master, and they ask him all the particulars, draft, revolutions at dead slow, speed at dead slow, stuff like that. And there's a card in the window for the pilot. It's called a pilot card, actually. When they do this, it's called the Master Pilot Exchange, and they just call it MPX. So we started doing what they call a TPX. We created this little term, a tug pilot exchange. So on the way out to meet the ship, we would ask him, what's your intended speed through the turn? What are the ratings, the tonnage ratings on the deck fittings? And we do this whole thing, and we came up with that. And we were I would say probably not the only one doing it, but it was semi-formalized. And it got to where they were offering the information as soon as they would call the boats. We'd already be underway. They're like, ask for the first boat. It's like, yeah, the George will be first tug out. It's like, all right, when you get here, George, we'll be doing 10 and a half, and you've got a 120-ton bit to work with. Like, man, thank you so much. We'll see you in 10 minutes. So it shaped up all the, it eliminated all the X's in the equations pretty quick. So we were able to do like really, really good work with those guys. And so we did that. I did that for 3 years in Miami. Met two more people that I still talk to quite regularly. I consider them two of the most valuable people in my circles. One was my mate, one was my deckhand, and the deckhand, I talk to him probably every day, and then the mate, she and I, we speak probably once every month or 3 weeks. We still keep in touch, and that was pretty awesome. The group of people that ended up there when they were trying to do this reformatting, refitting for Miami was, the people were great. Like there's no getting around it. The people that they had chose were like absolutely some of the exact perfect people to be there at the right time. And that helped a lot too. So that was great. And then in, oh my goodness, June or July of 2018, my family, I was at work, my family had taken my wife, my daughter, and my mother-in-law had taken a trip to Florida. My daughter was doing she's on a competitive studio dance team, and they were doing their nationals in Pensacola, and my mother was on the trip and she got sick. And she ended up passing away before we could get her home. And I decided I didn't want to be that far away from the family. So I transferred back to Louisiana. And now I work in Cameron, down in, there's an LNG facility that we have under contract on the Calcasieu River.
Well, I can say your eyes sparkled a little bit when you mentioned the Ascension and the Gasparilla. Tell me about those two boats.
So the Ascension, like I said, she was built in like 1918, Camden Yards, I think, which is in New Jersey. Her build plate was on the bow forever. It's probably in this office somewhere if I could go take a look. She was very historic boat. She ended up in New Orleans in, I want to say, the 40s. The company called Whiteman. And she had a steam boiler. She was a steam-powered, steam-driven tug. And when Whiteman had it, they did the first conversion, I think, from steam to diesel. And then she ended up when Whiteman sort of dissolved, Crescent Towing ended up with the boat. She was the Shannon Smith. And then the family from River Parishes acquired the tug and renamed it the Ascension. And it was her history from the 40s and 50s up until when I got on it. It was like a 40 or 50 year sort of legacy of being a very dependable and great boat for the pilots. And it was kind of neat to be part of that, to maintain her reputation with regardless of who's in the wheelhouse. That boat was always, it was fast, it was strong, it was ready to go. And she handled so well. She was such an overbuilt tug. Like, it was a riveted hull. Like, it was wild. It was just a huge, heavy boat, and it handled so well for ship work. It didn't really get affected by pressure gradients off the side of the ship and stuff like that. And it was one of the easiest boats to teach someone new with because she was so stable. And it was just a historic boat. You know, when I started out in 91, the guys, the captains that were running it, the engineers that were on it were like the go-to guys. That was like, you know, you did the hard work, would put you on the good boat kind of thing. So it was always like a golden ring to reach for. And by the time I got back in 2004, well, I guess in 97 and in 2004, you know, she was at the end of her life cycle. Like, you know, 2,000 horsepower wasn't going to be enough ever again. Single screws weren't ever going to be built again. And she started having some issues, like we'd have trouble with shaft bearings, just constantly wearing out. She was just starting to wear out from the inside out. And then the Gasparilla, that was a boat charter. Actually, she was chartered for Miami before she came to New Orleans because they were trying to get the type of boat, the power that they wanted for the pilots. So they measure the Z drive. The tractor tugs are the sellable factor is what they call bollard pull. So they'll have a pull test, certification test. They put a static line out and they pull. I think it's a 3-hour average. And then they flip the boat around. So they back into the line full power for like 2 or 3 hours. They flip the boat around and they pull on the line for 2 or 3 hours. And then give an average tension that it pulls. And that's called a bollard rating, a bollard pull rating. And the Gasparilla was a 70-ton boat. That's what she pulled, 70 tons static bollard pull. So the pilots were saying that the first generation tractors that were available to Marine at the time, they were requiring more power. And for the easiest, the quickest, most efficient way to do it was to charter a tug from somebody else in the window of opportunity, because to build your own boat would take at least a year. So they put a bare boat charter on this tug. And while she was in Miami, the first 70 or 80-ton tug from Moran was available. So they swapped it out. So the new Moran boat went to Miami, and the Gasparilla came to New Orleans to finish her charter because she was going back to her company of origin, and they were going to put it in Port Arthur, Texas anyway. So we just kept it for about 5 or 6 months before she finished up and went to Texas. And that boat was the first boat I got to operate as a captain with Caterpillar main engines. And she had a huge, for a tugboat in general, they were giant. They were like almost 11-foot propellers, and they were in nozzles and they're on Z drives. It moved so much water when it was underway. To this day, I think it may have still been the strongest boat I've ever worked on. It was supposedly a 70-ton boat, but man, it acted like 100 tons. It was such a strong, everything was perfect. The coincidental, engineered intentionally, I don't know, but from the ease of maintenance for the engineers to how powerful the boat was for us and for the pilots. She was quiet, super stable. She was just a great boat to be on. Fantastic tug. Built in I'm pretty sure Eastern Shipyard in Panama City. They build almost all of them. For a while, they were building almost all of them that style, that design. but I'm not definite, but I'm pretty sure that's where she was built. And so yeah, we had her for, like I said, about 5 or 6 months, and then she went out to back to her owners in Port Arthur, Texas. And what was the other boat? I guess the shiny boomerang came back after that, I guess. Something like that.
Well, I guess what's the craziest thing you've ever seen happen out there?
Oh man, so I was the captain on the St. James, which is a conventional twin screw. And I was actually part of it. I didn't see it. I was actually part of it. This is pretty wild. So we had a ship that was tied off on the east bank of the river in New Orleans. She was tied off starboard side too, and she's at like a repair yard. So they were going to take the ship out, flip it, and press it back in port side too, which is a downriver landing for the ships. And we had 3 tugs. It was the St. James, the St. Charles, and the St. John, all twin screw conventionals. And the boat I was on had intercontinental towing machine on the stern. So the other 2 captains asked if I wanted to get on the hawser since I had the winch and the liner and all that stuff. So yeah, man, I'll do it, no problem. So it's crew change, and of course everything happens either the night before crew change or at crew change. So Wednesday morning, we're hustling to get our groceries on the boat. We get on the boat, and the pilots are already at the dock. So we're dropping lines and going across. And the other 2 captains, are already making their way across. And they call back, say, "Hey, lad, do you mind if you get on the hawser for us?" Like, no, that's fine. So what we ended up having to do is they had to drop the stern line off the ship, and we had to get in behind the ship, almost on the dock. And we took our working line and we shackled into the winch, and we drug the line all the way along the port side of our tug. We hung it outside the bulwarks on the tires, draped it over on the tires, and we sent it up. So the idea was when the ship pulled off the dock and opened up, I was just going to shoot this gap between him and the dock and feed the line off on its own. And when it went tight, I'll be in a position to help pull him around. So the first pilot was I think he was uncomfortable with the maneuver. And I don't know if it was something he's not familiar with doing, or if it was his lack of trust or faith in the tugboats he was assigned, or whatever it was. But he was very apprehensive. You can hear it in his voice. You can tell by the way he was giving commands. So we started feeding the line out, and he starts opening the ship up off the dock, and we're shooting this gap, and everything's kind of going to plan so far. And as soon as the line goes tight, he tells me to start pulling full. So when we use the line normally, it's on the bow of the tug, and we send it up, and we're usually backing on it. And the tug does 60-70% of its power, available power, when you work astern. So I knew if I just dumped the throttles full ahead and pulled into that line, there's a chance we could part it. You don't want to part the line, because then you're you're not doing anything at all now and making the situation worse. So he's kind of pressing for me to get into those lines and start pulling. And so I'm easing into it. He's like, "Man, are you full yet?" It's like, "Not yet." He's like, "I need you to get full. I need you to pull hard now." It's like, well, if I go hard and I part this line, then we're both out of, shit out of luck pretty much. And he's like, "As soon as man, I need you to do it now." I'm like, "All right, man, here we go." So I never stopped pulling, but it just wasn't fast enough for him. So I just ended up getting all the way to the dashboard. The line's tight, everything's good tension. We're pulling. And he starts giving us directions which way to pull the stern of the ship. Pull it towards the ferry landing, come back to the cathedral, back to the ferry landing. So we're down at Algiers Point, trying to go upriver a little bit. And the way the boat was handling, to do that kind of work, like the way those boats are built, if you're going to tow something off your stern, it's usually for a distance. So you and whatever you're pulling are both making way, and you can steer, and you'll have a little set and stuff like that. But when you're pulling full and you're not making much headway, all the energies involved that move your pivot point to right where the winch is connected, like literally the drum of the winch. So when I would give it some, like he'd tell me to turn to port, when I go to turn to port, the boat wouldn't come to port, the whole boat would just pivot to port and then drive over. So that reaction wasn't fast enough for him either. And about the third or fourth command he gave us, I had all my crew up because it was just one of those things like, man, we just got on anyway, nobody's in bed yet, but it's like, I want everybody in the wheelhouse ready. And about the fourth command he gave us, I looked over at my mate, my deckhand, I'm like, go secure every door, get your life jackets ready. I'm not vibing with this one right now. There's a high possibility of something going really wrong. So they ran down main deck and they secured all the hatches, like portholes, everything. And they were coming back up, and we were pulling on a slight angle to my port, to his starboard. And he told me to bring it straight up the river. So I'm starting to bring the tug back around. And all of a sudden, the bow of the tug just started rising and rising and rising. And I'm looking, and we're not making any headway. Then all of a sudden, the boat surges. And I'm like, oh no. And I turn around and look, and the pilot started backing the ship's wheel, and he took all the load off my line once she stood up. And she heeled over at probably 25 or 30 degrees and like this really weird angle. So the first thing I did, I just took all the power off the port engine, and I tried to get the starboard engine to drive my bow back down. And as soon as we got the boat half-assed settled, I just steadied up on like probably about a third, maybe a half on both, and started a slight right rudder, and we're driving back out of that line. And I told my mate and my deckhand, the engineer, all of them, go cut it. Go, he's going to kill us. You got to cut this line. So they went out there and they broke it loose. And I called the pilot. I was like, man, so we part of the line. We're out of here. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, you got to stop backing the ship because the line's coming to you now. Like it got out of hand so fast. So fast. When we got done, the captain that was on the other tugboat, he said he could see when the boat stood up and rolled, he can see our starboard propeller. Still, like we were still pulling on that line, but he can see the starboard propeller like almost 2/3 out of the water. That was the single wildest thing I've ever been involved in.
Well, I'm glad you didn't go under, man.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, boy, you just threw my head a question, but now I lost it. It's a hell of a finish. Let's take it easy toward the end here. Any forecast on retirement?
None. No, we have a daughter, only child, our daughter. She's about to graduate high school in a couple of weeks, and she's going off to college. So I'll have at least 4 years of that before I can retire. I don't know what that even would be. I don't know. I'm not like, so I have to say, the last couple of weeks listening to your show, I'm gonna mess up his last name, but I'm gonna say Boucher. Cohen Boucher?
Cohen Bush. Yeah.
Bush. All right. He might be my new favorite person on the entire planet after that interview you did with him. Man, all of his stuff, man. The Cyprus, the Gulf, all this time on the Port Allen, back to the Port Allen. Like that was a very interesting podcast. I enjoyed that one a lot. But to like hear him talk about all that stuff, I've never had those kind of hobbies. I've never been like I do play golf. I like to cook and stuff like that, but I don't have a retirement plan. I don't know what that would even feel like. Hopefully, I don't know if you've seen it, some of the other social media stuff. Just a month ago, myself and another captain from Port Arthur, Texas, we received an award from the company. It's a brass bell award, like a ship's bell award, for all the stuff we do as instructors and mentors. We do a lot of offsite training in simulators and campuses. And I'd like to find a way to turn that into a new trajectory from my career. I'd really like to focus on teaching and instruction and mentorship. 32 years on a boat's a long time on a boat. And yeah, it's a great job. I don't want to make it sound like I'm I'm tired of missing out at home life. It's not the job that I'm tired of. The tractor tugs are a whole other thing now. And it's more akin to flying a helicopter than driving a boat. And it's such a unique skill. And I really enjoy teaching. I do still enjoy running the boats, but it's just been a long time away. So I'd like to find, I actually started back in November, late October. I created an LLC. So I'm trying to spin that off into something I can do, maybe as a retirement gig, as an instructor or a consultant.
Well, I think that'll do it for my questions, Captain Royce. I appreciate your time this morning.
So thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot.